My mother had a talent for making me disappear every Christmas without ever saying the words out loud. I'm Nora Ellison. I'm 34 years old, and by the time I bought a manor in a quiet Vermont town, I had already spent most of my life learning what it felt like to be treated like an afterthought in my own family. For years, December 25th meant the same thing for me: a missing seat at the table, a gift bought in a hurry, if there was one at all, a polite excuse about how everyone thought I was busy, or sleeping, or working, as if I had somehow wandered out of my own place in the family portrait. Last Christmas was the year I finally stopped pretending it was accidental. I drove 5 hours through freezing rain with a trunk full of expensive gifts, only to find the house glowing with warmth, music, and laughter that clearly had no space left for me. When the door opened, I was met with surprise that looked a lot more like irritation. I stood there in the cold, holding bags in both hands, while the person who should have wanted me there acted like I had shown up uninvited to someone else's celebration. That was the night something in me went still. So this year, I bought myself something no one in that family could take credit for: a manor. Old stone walls, iron gates, and enough silence to finally hear my own thoughts. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought distance, paperwork, and locked gates would be enough. I was wrong. Because the moment they found out I had something beautiful, something valuable, something they could use, they remembered me all at once. And when they came to my gate, they didn't come with apologies. They came with a locksmith, a story, and a plan that would have ruined me if I had still been the woman they thought I was. Before I tell you how they found me and why they thought they could take what was mine, tell me where you're listening from tonight and how late it is where you are. Because this Christmas story went a lot farther than my family ever expected. Hey, does the weather where you are feel perfectly in tune with your current mood right now? I did not buy the manor because I wanted to feel rich. I bought it because I was tired of feeling reachable. After last Christmas, I changed everything in ways no one in my family would notice until it was too late. I changed my number. I locked down every old account they might use to track me. I moved my mail through a private box 2 towns over. I stopped posting photos, stopped commenting, stopped leaving any little digital fingerprints that could lead them back to me. At work in Boston, I kept my routines clean and boring. I showed up, did my job, came home, and spent nights building the one thing I had never had in that family: a plan that belonged only to me. The manor found me in late spring, buried in a quiet Vermont listing that most people would have skipped past because the place looked too severe, too old, too remote. The house sat on a hill outside Evergreen Hollow, wrapped in stone and silence, with iron gates at the entrance and enough land around it to make the rest of the world feel far away. The locals called it Blackthorn Manor, and it came with layers of legal protection because it was part of the historic district. Most buyers would have seen red tape. I saw armor. I bought it through a trust structure that made the paperwork harder to follow than a normal deed. That mattered to me. I wanted privacy, but more than that, I wanted distance between my name and anything my family might try to touch. By December, the house was finally mine to live in, even if the title itself sat inside a legal arrangement too boring for most people to understand and too strong for careless liars to get around. 3 days before Christmas, I drove up with a car full of groceries, books, candles, and enough good wine to last a week. I remember standing in the front hall on that first night, listening to the quiet settle over the house like it had been waiting for me. No one interrupting me, no one asking what I had brought for Logan. No one telling me to be patient, to be gracious, to be the bigger person, as if being neglected had always been some moral test I was supposed to pass. For the first time in my life, silence did not feel like punishment. It felt chosen. I walked through every room slowly, trailing my fingertips over old wood and cold stone, and I let myself imagine a Christmas that belonged to me. I lit the library fireplace. I opened a bottle of Cabernet. I sat in a leather chair and watched the flames until I realized something almost embarrassing. I felt safe. That feeling was so unfamiliar that it made me laugh out loud in an empty room. I should have known peace that sharp would never go unchallenged. Because while I was building a life no one in my family had earned the right to enter, someone else had been watching from a distance, waiting for the moment my privacy turned into something they could exploit. I did not know then that my mother had already started asking questions, already started telling people I was isolating myself, already planting the idea that I had become unstable, secretive, difficult. In other words, exactly the kind of woman people stop believing when she says she is in danger. That was always her favorite trick. She never had to hit me or scream at me in public. She just had to tell the story first, and by the afternoon of December 23rd, she was ready to tell another one at my front gate. I heard the engines before I saw the cars. That road led almost nowhere, and no one drove up there by accident, especially not that late in the afternoon with snow starting to come down again. I was in the kitchen filling a glass of water when the sound rolled up the driveway, low and expensive, the kind of sound that announces people who think the world should make room for them. I kept the lights off and moved to the front window. Two dark SUVs came into view, followed by a locksmith van. My first feeling was not fear, it was insult. They had not called, they had not apologized, they had not shown up to say they missed me. They had brought tools. The first door opened and my mother stepped out in a cream wool coat that looked like she had dressed for a holiday photo shoot instead of a trespass. Behind her came my father, Richard Ellison, already wearing the tired expression he used whenever he wanted strangers to think he was the reasonable one. Logan climbed out of the second SUV, talking into his phone, and then started unloading flat-packed display stands and storage bins like he was arriving for a job. That told me more than any speech could have. They were not here to visit. They were here to install themselves. I walked down to the gate and stopped on my side of the bars. My mother smiled at me in that pained, delicate way she used when she wanted an audience to believe she was suffering nobly. "Nora," she said, as if this were all so simple. "Open the gate, sweetheart. It is freezing." I asked the only question that mattered. "How did you find me?" Richard sighed before she could answer, and that alone told me he wanted to enjoy this. "Logan found a tagged flooring photo online," he said. Then he cross-checked the stonework with an old preservation archive. "You really should be more careful." There was something so calm about the way he said that, as if violating my privacy proved I had somehow failed an intelligence test. My mother stepped closer to the bars. "We were worried about you," she said. "Spending Christmas all alone in a place this big is not healthy. We thought family should be together." I almost laughed. Family had never needed to be together when I was the one left outside. Then Logan came forward with a folded document in one hand and a grin that already felt greedy. "Good news," he said. "We solved the space issue." He pressed the paperwork against the gate so I could read it. It was styled like a shared residential use agreement with language about guest wing access, family holiday overflow, event hosting rights, and long-term occupancy protections. At the bottom was a version of my signature close enough to sting. My stomach dropped, not because I believed it would hold up in court, but because I knew immediately what their strategy was. Get inside first, create a scene second, force me into a slow legal mess while they turned my house into a set for whatever disaster Logan was currently selling online. I looked up at him. "This is fake." My mother dabbed at the corner of one dry eye and turned slightly toward the locksmith, making sure he could see the profile that had gotten her sympathy from churchwomen and caterers and neighbors for 30 years. "She is confused," she said softly. She has been under so much stress. We are just trying to help her." The locksmith shifted uncomfortably. Richard took over, using that low professional tone that had gotten him out of responsibility his whole life. "We have an agreement and a family situation," he said. "She gets overwhelmed. We are only trying to settle in quietly." Then Logan nodded toward the keypad and the locksmith stepped forward with his drill. It was that casual, that entitled. They did not even pretend long. They expected me to panic, to start shouting, to become the unstable woman my mother had already described. Instead, I took out my phone and started recording. My mother's smile faltered for the first time. "What are you doing, Nora?" I kept the camera steady on the drill, on the van logo, on Logan's face, on Richard holding the forged paperwork like it was already enough. "Building a timeline," I said, and I swear there was a brief, beautiful second when all three of them looked at me like they had just realized I was no longer the daughter who would stand there begging to be let in. The deputy arrived just as the locksmith put the drill to the gate control box. I had called the moment the tool came out, and for one hopeful second I thought the law might still know the difference between a family and an invasion. But hope has always been the most expensive mistake I make around those people. Deputy Mason Cole was young, cold, and already irritated before he stepped out of his cruiser. He looked from me to the SUVs to the forged document in Richard's hand, and I could see him deciding, almost in real time, how much effort he wanted to spend on what he assumed was a wealthy family argument. My mother moved first, of course. She approached him with the perfect amount of trembling in her voice. "Deputy, thank God," she said. "Our daughter has shut herself away and she is not well. We have been trying to reach her for weeks." Richard handed over the paperwork with a weary expression, meant to imply he had done everything right, and I had forced this unpleasant scene. Logan stood in the background with the bins and rolled his eyes like I was making everyone's life difficult again. I stayed exactly where I was and kept my phone recording at my side. I said my name clearly. I said I was the lawful resident. I said they did not have permission to enter. I said the signature on that agreement was forged. The deputy glanced at the papers, glanced at me, and then made the mistake too many people had made before him. He listened to the calmer liar. My mother lowered her voice and said words I had heard variations of my whole life. She gets like this when she feels rejected. She thinks everything is an attack. Rejected. As if neglect were an emotion I had invented instead of a pattern she had built. The deputy rubbed his jaw and gave me the kind of look that always lands on women who are inconvenient but articulate. "Ma'am, if there is paperwork and a dispute over validity, this may be civil." Civil, as if a fake agreement, a drill, and a planned occupation were just a misunderstanding with good winter coats. Richard seized the opening immediately. "We are not trying to remove her," he said. "We are trying to support family use of the property. Logan needs temporary space for a holiday content business he is launching, and Nora had agreed before she started pulling away again." That was the first time the real motive made itself fully visible. A holiday content business. Of course, that explained the display stands, the bins, the lighting cases still in the back of the SUV. Logan had not come to live quietly in a basement. He had come to turn my house into a backdrop he could monetize while my mother played gracious hostess, and my father called it helping. I asked Logan directly, still filming, "Are you trying to run events out of my home?" He smirked. "It is not your home like that, Nora." That line stayed with me. Not your home like that. Because underneath every lie my family ever told, there was always the same belief. Nothing that belonged to me really counted as mine if they decided they wanted it. The deputy told everyone to keep the peace and stopped short of removing them. He did not give them full permission, but he did something almost worse. He created ambiguity, the kind selfish people live on. The moment he stepped back toward his cruiser, Logan started unloading more equipment onto the roadside shoulder. He was already placing a call, giving my address to someone, and saying the words, transfer service and seasonal business use. That was when I called Elena Vargas. She picked up on the second ring, and I gave her the facts fast. Forged occupancy agreement, attempted forced entry, possible utility fraud, preservation district property, active police presence. Elena did not waste time pretending this was ordinary. Nora, she said, do not let them bait you into a screaming match. Record everything. Ask the deputy to verify title ownership, not just residency paperwork. And if Logan is using the property for commercial activity, he is about to bury himself. I looked at my family, at the bins, the fake concern, the performance. And for the first time that day, I felt something steadier than anger. I felt structure. They had shown up believing I was alone. What they had actually done was step into a system of evidence, zoning, and title law that none of them understood. My mother saw my expression change and frowned. I think that was the moment she realized her usual weapon, my silence, was not working anymore. Elena did not come in person that afternoon, but she did something better. She called the deputy directly, then emailed certified title documents to his department while I stood there in the cold watching my family perform innocence beside a locksmith van. 10 minutes later, the mood changed. It did not change all at once, and that was the satisfying part. It changed slowly, like ice cracking under too much weight. The deputy walked back toward the gate with a new stiffness in his posture and asked Richard to hand over the agreement again. Then he asked a question my father clearly had not prepared for. If your daughter signed this as owner, why is title held by the Blackthorn Heritage Residential Trust? Richard blinked. Logan stopped moving. My mother actually lost her expression for a second before she put it back on. The deputy continued, now speaking with the forced patience people use when they realize someone has tried to drag them into a lie. Ms. Ellison is the resident beneficiary and trustee occupant. She is not individually titled the way this document claims. That means your agreement has a serious validity problem before we even get to the alleged signature. Elena then joined by speakerphone, and listening to her dismantle them was almost luxurious. She explained that no one had authority to create private occupancy rights against the trust the way this document attempted. She explained that any planned commercial use in a preservation district without approval would trigger violations. She explained that if Logan had already initiated utilities or seasonal business services using my personal information, the matter had gone well beyond a holiday misunderstanding. My mother tried to interrupt with something about family generosity and concern, but Elena cut clean through it. Concern does not arrive with a drill, she said. For a moment, no one spoke. The deputy finally told them to leave the premises and stop unloading property. Logan argued first, naturally. He said this was harassment, that I had promised space, that I was sabotaging his launch. My father tried the old respectable man routine one last time. Surely this can be resolved privately. But there was nothing private left. My phone had all of it. The deputy had all of it. Elena had all of it. My mother stepped forward and hissed my name in a voice too low for the deputy, but not too low for me. You are humiliating us. That word almost made me laugh. As if humiliation had only just arrived in our family and had not been sitting next to me every Christmas dinner since childhood. They finally started packing up, but not like people who accepted defeat. They moved like people storing rage for later. Logan shoved bins back into the SUV hard enough to crack one. Richard folded the forged paperwork with a shaking hand and kept glancing at me like he was trying to memorize the version of me who had become dangerous. My mother said nothing else to me in front of the deputy, which is how I knew she was already planning the next version of the story. They drove off before sunset. I watched them until the taillights disappeared through the trees. Then I locked the gate and walked back toward the house with the kind of exhaustion that feels chemical. I thought I had won the first round cleanly. I was wrong. Inside, I checked the front camera feed and found static. Then the side entrance feed cut out too. Logan had done something on the way out, probably at the cable junction by the stone column near the drive. He had not cut the power. He had done something more intentional. He had blinded the two cameras that mattered most if they came back after dark. A few minutes later, my phone rang from the utility company asking me to confirm a service update request I had never made. Logan had already tried to move part of the account structure using information only family would know: social security fragments, old addresses, security prompts. My skin went cold in a way the winter air could not manage. That night, I sat at the library desk under lamplight with my laptop open and built the file that would later ruin them. I froze my credit. I documented the utility attempt. I sent Elena every screenshot. I filed an identity theft report. I wrote out the timeline by hand, because sometimes anger is easier to trust when you can see it in ink. And sometime after midnight, while the fire burned low and the old house settled around me, I realized something simple and ugly. They had not come because they loved me. They had come because I had finally built something far enough outside their control that the only way to live with it was to take it back. That kind of desperation does not leave quietly. It circles and returns. By morning, my mother had done exactly what I knew she would do. She went public first. A cousin I had not spoken to in years sent me a screenshot before breakfast. My mother had posted on Facebook that she and my father had driven all the way to Evergreen Hollow to check on their isolated daughter, only to find me confused, aggressive, and hiding alone in a dark historic home after weeks of concerning behavior. The comments were full of pity for her and disgust for me. Praying for your family. She always seemed troubled. Some children do not understand sacrifice. I read every line without replying. Then I took screenshots of all of it and saved them into a folder labeled defamation. That was the difference between the old me and the woman sitting in Blackthorn Manor now. I no longer argued with lies in the moment. I archived them. Around 10, Logan tried again through a different angle. This time, it was not just utilities. He submitted a vendor inquiry for a seasonal event permit using my address and a slightly mangled version of my name, probably hoping to establish a paper trail that made it look like operations had already begun. That was when the whole shape of their plan finally locked into place for me. Logan was drowning financially and needed a prestigious holiday venue fast. My mother wanted the social image of a curated family Christmas business with her as the face of warmth and tradition. My father wanted the whole thing framed as a cooperative family arrangement so no one would ask where the money came from or why the house was being used at all. They were not trying to take shelter. They were trying to take narrative, space, and legitimacy in one move. Elena called just before noon and confirmed what I had already guessed. If they came back and attempted to stage entry again, especially with commercial materials or false authority paperwork, we could tighten everything into a much stronger criminal and civil package. June Mercer from the local paper also returned my email. She was not dramatic, just careful. She said the screenshots, the fake agreement, the utility attempt, and the preservation issues made this more than family gossip if I could prove intent and repeat conduct. I told her I thought I could. Then I made the decision that changed the end of the story. I stopped thinking like a daughter trying to defend her peace and started thinking like an investigator setting conditions. Through Harold Whitmore at the local Heritage Society, I arranged a small Christmas Eve open house under the Trust's permitted residential heritage hospitality guidelines, which were boring enough on paper to sound harmless and powerful enough in practice to place respected witnesses inside the home. No music advertised online, no public blast, just a handful of invited locals, a reporter, my attorney on standby, and a retired locksmith named Caleb Dunn, who knew enough about entry jobs to tell exactly what kind of forced access someone had attempted. The point was not a party. The point was witnesses with credibility my family could not outtalk. By late afternoon on Christmas Eve, the house looked dark from the road on purpose. Curtains drawn, exterior lights off. No sign of life except what you could only notice if you were already watching too closely. Inside, it was different. Lamps glowed low in the library and dining room. Harold and two preservation board members sat with mulled wine discussing plaster restoration in voices so calm it felt surreal. June sat up quietly near the front hall, where she could see and hear everything without becoming the center of it. Caleb stood by the back corridor window with the posture of a man already angry at whatever fool thought old houses were easy to breach. Officer Reed Porter, working private security detail arranged through Elena's network and backed by local law enforcement awareness, waded deeper in the house with another deputy close enough to move the moment entry became illegal beyond dispute. I stood in the foyer in a black dress I had chosen for one reason only. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in her own house. When 7 o'clock came and went, I almost wondered if they had finally found caution. Then at 7:14, the sensor on the outer drive pinged my phone. Headlights off, slow movement, a rental truck behind the second SUV. Not subtle anymore, not even pretending. My mother had forgotten me every Christmas until I bought a Manor. Now she was back on Christmas Eve with transport, tools, and enough nerve to believe the dark house ahead of her was empty. She was about to learn the difference between empty and waiting. From the front window, I watched them pull into the drive without headlights, which told me everything about how innocent they knew they were not. Logan jumped out first this time with a crowbar in one hand and the wild, cornered energy of someone who had run out of softer lies. Richard came behind him carrying a folder thick enough to be another performance. My mother stepped out last in a dark coat with her hair done and her makeup perfect, because even now, even at the edge of a crime, she wanted to look good doing it. There was a second locksmith, too, younger than the first, and nervous in exactly the way guilty people always are when they realize too late that someone else's family emergency may actually be a felony. No one in the house moved toward the door. That was the beauty of it. We let them prove intent without interruption. Through the old wood and stone, we heard everything. Logan saying just break the side glass if the lock fights you. Richard telling the locksmith they had power of attorney and a right to intervene. My mother raising her voice just enough to sound heartbroken if anyone happened to hear. Nora, sweetheart, open the door. We are here because we love you. There was no love in the crowbar that hit my front lock seconds later. The first strike echoed through the foyer so sharply that even the preservation board members in the dining room went still. The second blow splintered the frame enough for cold air to push into the house. Then the younger locksmith drilled while Logan pried, and Richard barked instructions. And finally the old door gave with a violent crack that sounded less like wood breaking than history losing patience. Logan stumbled in first, breathing hard, crowbar still in his fist, and for one full second he wore triumph on his face. Then the lights came up. Not every lamp in the house. Just enough. Enough to catch them in the foyer with a ruined lock, broken frame, and tools in hand. Enough for them to see me standing at the foot of the staircase. Enough for them to notice June Mercer lifting her phone to record. Enough for them to notice Harold Whitmore and the preservation board members staring from the dining room doorway, like they had just watched someone kick through a church altar. Enough for them to notice Caleb Dunn step forward and say with complete disgust, "That is forced entry." Enough for them to notice Officer Reed Porter emerge from the hallway with Deputy Mason right behind him. Flashlights hit their faces hard and fast. Hands where I can see them now. Logan froze first. My father did not. He tried one last pivot, waving the folder and talking too fast. We have authority. She is unstable. She is isolating. We are family. Officer Porter did not even glance at him. Family does not get to break a protected residence with burglary tools, he said. Logan lowered the crowbar slowly like he had suddenly remembered metal had weight. My mother stared at me with a level of hatred so pure it almost looked clean. You set us up, she whispered. No, I said. I documented you. Elena stepped in then, calm as winter, and took the folder from Richard's hand. Fake emergency authority. Invalid on its face, she said after a quick scan. Wrong execution standard, wrong witness structure, wrong property relationship. You really all committed a felony with paperwork you downloaded from the internet. June almost smiled at that, but did not stop recording. My mother tried a different angle. She began to cry, loudly and beautifully, the same way she always had when she needed strangers to see pain instead of strategy. But this time, the audience had context. June had the Facebook post. Elena had the forged agreement. I had the utility fraud trail. Caleb had the earlier timeline of manipulation. Harold had already seen the commercial bins in the first visit and knew exactly what kind of heritage violations Logan had intended. My father reached for control again and failed again. This has gone too far, he said. Nora, tell them we only came to talk. I looked him in the eye and thought of every Christmas table where I had felt smaller than the empty space beside me. Then I said the truest thing I knew. People who come to talk do not bring crowbars. Officer Porter moved in first on Logan, who panicked exactly when it counted most. He turned as if to bolt toward the open door, and the deputy caught him before he made it 2 steps. The crowbar hit the marble floor with a sound so final that my mother actually gasped. Handcuffs clicked shut around Logan's wrists. My father protested, then protested harder when Officer Porter told him to turn around too. Conspiracy, trespass, forced entry, forged instruments, attempted fraudulent occupation, he listed in that flat law enforcement voice that strips a person of all the stories they tell about themselves. Richard looked stunned, like consequences were something that had always happened to other men. My mother stood alone in the center of the ruined foyer, not yet cuffed, staring at the broken door and the witnesses and me. She tried one last cruel throw because cruelty was the only language she had ever really mastered. After everything I did for you, this is how you repay me. I took a step closer. The house was warm behind me. The snow was blowing in around the edges of the broken door. And for the first time in my life, I did not hear her words as truth, duty, or guilt. I heard them as evidence of a person who could only remember I existed when she wanted access to something I owned. Everything you ever did for me had a receipt attached, I said. Love does not break in. Love does not forge signatures. Love does not wait until Christmas to see whether a house can be turned into profit. Then Officer Porter told her to turn around, and she did, slowly, in disbelief, as though the universe had somehow failed to recognize who she thought she was. When the handcuffs closed on her wrists, the sound was smaller than I expected. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just precise. That was what made it satisfying. Not revenge as chaos, revenge as accuracy. One by one, they were walked out past the stone columns, past the broken threshold they had created, past the witnesses they could not charm, and toward the waiting cruisers at the end of the drive. Logan cried first. My mother kept asking for a private conversation. My father said almost nothing once he realized no one cared how reasonable he looked anymore. June stayed long enough to confirm timelines and statements, and by morning the local story was no longer about a worried family and a troubled daughter. It was about an attempted holiday takeover of a protected home, forged family paperwork, and a staged public narrative that collapsed under evidence. Logan's pending business partnerships disappeared within a week. Vendors withdrew. The online accounts linked to his fake holiday venture were reported and suspended. My father spent the start of the new year paying attorneys instead of controlling rooms, and my mother, who had built so much of her identity around being seen as warm, elegant, and impossible to question, had to live with a town that now knew exactly what her tears were worth. Later that night, after the statements were taken and the cruisers were gone and the temporary board was fixed over the broken door, I stood alone by the Christmas tree in the great hall with a glass of wine in my hand and the quiet I had wanted all along finally returning to me. The lesson that stayed with me was not just that boundaries matter. It was that some people will call your boundary cruelty because your obedience used to benefit them. I think a lot of us are raised to believe family means access, forgiveness, and endless explanation. But family without respect becomes entitlement, and entitlement grows teeth the moment you build something it cannot control. If this story means anything beyond what happened in that house, I hope it reminds someone listening that peace is not selfish, evidence is not cold, and protecting yourself from people who keep wounding you is not a betrayal of love. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for your life and for your future is choose yourself before the damage becomes tradition. And for the first time in all my years, Christmas did not feel like the season I got forgotten. It felt like the night I was finally seen,